This report, the interim report of the Bushfire Royal Commission, has just been tabled in the State Parliament. So it's now been officially published and released publicly. Before I begin the government's official response in relation to the report today, I think it is important that we all remember why we are here. We're here today because our nation suffered, our state suffered, what is the worst natural disaster in our history. On the 7th of February 2009, those bushfires that swept across our state caused the loss of life of 173 people, and those families and their loved ones are still living on with that pain. We lost more than 2,000 homes, more than 61 buildings, and those people are embarking on the tough task of rebuilding their lives. What occurred on February 7th was a tragedy that touched the life of almost every Victorian in some way. It was families and friends who lost loved ones, firefighters and emergency services workers who battled a blaze and blazes unlike anything that they'd ever seen before, and everyday Victorians and indeed Australians whose hearts went out to all of those who were so affected. And as I've said on many occasions through those fires, for many of us, we saw and heard some of the worst things that we would ever hear or see in our lives. But through that all, we also saw some of the very best of human behaviour. And so today, as we release this report, we remember all of those who lost so much on that terrible, terrible day, but we also recall and bring to mind the extraordinary efforts of our firefighters and emergency services personnel across the state who did so much to try and protect our state. In particular, can I express my deepest gratitude to the thousands of firefighters, the support staff, the emergency services personnel who responded to these unprecedented fires in what were such difficult and treacherous circumstances. The DSE and networked emergency organisations mobilised up to 4,584 staff each day, up to 308 tankers and slip-on units and 71 bulldozers. The CFA mobilised up to 2,500 staff and or volunteers each day with up to 600 appliances, while the MFB mobilised up to 618 firefighters and 27 appliances. On each day of the fire, there are up to 46 aircraft that were deployed, including 4 of the Elvis-type cranes. And the reason we're here today is because we don't want this tragedy to ever happen again in our state. That is the single and simple reason why we are here today. And we are determined as a government, as I've said on many, many occasions, to take whatever steps are necessary to make our state as fire safe as possible in the run-up to this year's fire season. I want to spend just a couple of minutes today, if I could, in responding to the Commission's report, to just run you through some of the government action to date, because the fact is, I think, as a result of the actions that we've taken since the fires, the views which the community has put, and the report's recommendations today, there is a very high degree of overlap between the Commission's interim recommendations and the action that we've taken to date as a government. And you'll recall very early on in the Commission's establishment, Commissioner Bernie Teague made it very clear that the government should do and should take whatever action was necessary to make the state safer and not wait until the interim report. And so we have taken many actions, and I'm pleased to say that many of those actions that we've taken have been endorsed by the Commission today in their report. Our government has announced a range of bushfire and reconstruction measures, including more than $50 million of new initiatives in our submission to the Commission and close to $1 billion in funding that was made available through the state budget and with the support of the Commonwealth. Our government has been focused on providing better equipment and more resources for our emergency services, on improving communications and warnings for emergencies, on increasing the fire preparedness that people can undertake, and better community planning in the event of an emergency. And the actions that we have taken or foreshadowed ahead of today, firstly in relation to equipment and resources, we committed $167 million in the state budget to maintain and improve emergency services communications, including a boost to ESTA call taking, new emergency services units, upgrading radios and pagers for firefighters and the SES, and more than $40 million to replace vehicles for emergency services. And we've also brought forward, as you recall just a couple of weeks ago, Gavin Jennings and I were in the Dandenongs, we've brought forward and increased the number of DSE seasonal firefighters. In the area of communications and warnings, and such an important area because, as the Commission has said today in its interim report, and is very evident from what occurred on February 7th, in relation to communications and some of our technology and warning systems, these didn't work as well as they should have and could have on that day. And so we've been leading the national project to roll out a national emergency warning system before the next bushfire season. As you know, this is something that Victoria has pushed strongly. We have the agreement of COAG. We're doing a streamlined tender. We will see the first stage of this in place by this year's fire season. We've made further commitments to improving communications, including clearer communication of warnings, clearer lines of responsibilities for warnings, a single behind-the-scenes website, the development of guidelines for the use of sirens, and improvement to the communication of fire danger ratings. And we also announced, of course, in our submission to the Commission, a revision of the prepare, stay and defend or leave early policy with a much stronger emphasis on leaving early. In terms of fire preparedness, we've announced that there will be a month of intense activity culminating in a bushfire preparedness week in October. And again, I just want to make it clear, in that week in October, the whole focus of the state, of government, of community organisations, of local government, of individuals, of neighbourhoods, of streets, all of them, the single focus during that week will be to make sure that our state is as prepared and as fire safe and fire ready as we possibly can be, as humanly possible, for this year's fire season. We'll also be undertaking an intensive education and awareness campaign, and I mentioned this earlier, $11.5 million. Some of that, a small part of that, on paid advertising, but particularly focused around community information and community engagement. In terms of community planning, we've announced that there will be help from the fire services to assess the defendability of homes, including the development of an online risk assessment tool. There'll be the development of township protection plans in high bushfire risk locations, and there'll be the identification of neighbourhood safer places. The next fire season is just 72 days away as I speak, and I think had the government, following the fires of February 7th, not put in place a whole series of measures, a whole series of actions, different policies, stronger policies, better lines of communications, better fire preparation, stronger budget support. Had we not done those things since the fires of February 7th, I believe that we would have been strongly criticised by the Victorian community. It would have been the wrong thing to do. And I make no apology as Premier for saying that the single most important responsibility that I've got, that the state has between now and the rest of the year, is to make our state as fire safe and as fire ready as possible. And so we have made a lot of recommendations, we have taken a lot of action, we have put aside budget funding. It's all designed to keep our state safe. Of the 51 recommendations that the Commission has made, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority, are already actions in place by the government or are agreed in principle. There are a very small number of recommendations which the Commission has made which we will want to examine in more detail. But for the vast majority, we are moving forward in a positive way, preparing for the next fire season in a way which is fully consistent with the recommendations of the Commission, with their learnings from listening to Victorians from right across the state, including those who were so terribly affected by the fires.